On Christmas Eve, Chicago O'Hare Airport was busier than ever. Tickets in hand, families rushed to board, carrying gifts, luggage, and dreams of reunions by the fireplace. Among the dozens of flights, Flight 485 bound for Los Angeles promised to be just another routine journey. But for its 237 passengers, this trip would soon become an unforgettable milestone. Among them was Susan Carter, a single mother taking her son Ethan to meet his grandparents for the first time, and Jack Thompson, a weary executive just hoping to make it in time for Christmas dinner. As the plane took off, smiles and anticipation of happy moments filled the cabin. Flight attendants served hot chocolate, and the captain wished everyone a Merry Christmas over the intercom. The atmosphere was almost magical, a peaceful pause from the chaos of the airport. However, there was something different about this flight, something the passengers couldn't quite put their finger on, but would soon feel. As the plane climbed higher, what seemed like a perfect celebration began to show signs that not everything was as it seemed. When the cabin lights flickered for the first time, the mood started to shift. Probably just turbulence, passengers thought, laughing nervously. But the flickering lights were just the beginning of a series of events that would turn these passengers' Christmas into a true nightmare. Minute by minute, the air grew heavier, and a strange sense of unease began to spread. Yet no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. It was precisely when the captain announced that the flight would make a slight route adjustment due to an unusual weather anomaly that silence fell over the cabin. A phrase that should have been routine instead sounded almost cryptic to those paying attention. Glances were exchanged, and even the once noisy children fell silent. It was as if the Christmas spirit had given way to something no one could explain. Get ready to dive into this breathtaking story, where holiday cheer, magic, and smiles on Christmas Eve transform into a mystery that defies logic. One flight, hundreds of stories, and a night that will never be forgotten. With every twist in the plot, you'll witness how these passengers faced the unexpected and uncovered truths hidden above the clouds. Shall we continue? Everything seemed normal on Flight 485 until a series of flickering lights began catching the passengers' attention. Some found it amusing, others cracked jokes, but Susan noticed something was wrong. She tried to distract Ethan with a game on the tablet, but her eyes kept darting back to the flight attendants, who appeared more tense than usual. Jack, ever observant, noticed that the lights weren't flickering randomly. It was almost as if they followed a pattern. Suddenly, the plane shook violently, sending trays and cups tumbling to the floor. The turbulence drew gasps and murmurs of concern, but the pilot quickly announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some mild turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened." His voice was steady, but there was something in his tone that failed to reassure the passengers. The discomfort in the cabin was palpable, and glances began to dart nervously between seats. Shortly after, something caught Jack's attention. Through the window, he saw a strange glow in the sky, something that didn't seem natural. It was a pulsating light, shifting between shades of blue and purple, dancing among the clouds. He leaned closer to the glass, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Could it be an electrical storm? He wondered. But the peculiar pattern of the lights quickly ruled out that possibility. Meanwhile, the flight attendants exchanged discreet glances, and one of them walked briskly to the cockpit. The tension among the passengers grew, but no one dared to speak up. The silence was broken by a child sitting further ahead, who pointed at the entertainment screen. "Look, Mom, something's wrong." The screens, which had been displaying movies and flight information, began flickering with static. One by one, the systems shut down, plunging the cabin into an even more unsettling atmosphere. Just when it seemed things were settling down, the screens turned back on, but they weren't showing the usual movies or maps. Instead, a peculiar message appeared. "You have been chosen." The phrase appeared on every screen, freezing the passengers in their seats. Some began murmuring, others pressed the call buttons to summon the flight attendants, but no one received a response. What did it mean? And more importantly, who or what had sent this message? After the mysterious message, the cabin sank into a heavy silence. The sound of the engine, usually constant and reassuring on normal flights, felt distant and muffled. Susan held Ethan's hand tightly, trying to remain calm. "What does this mean, Mum?" he asked softly. Susan didn't know how to respond, but attempted a reassuring smile. Jack, on the other hand, had already leaned over to speak with a passenger nearby, trying to figure out if this was some sort of prank or technical error. The flight attendants began walking through the cabin, but their faces betrayed a concern they tried to mask. A young flight attendant, seemingly new, stumbled as she responded to a passenger's call. "Sir, please remain calm. We are investigating what happened," she said, but her voice trembled, which only heightened the unease. The captain made no further announcements, and the lack of explanations fueled the tension. With every passing minute, more passengers began standing up, ignoring the safety warnings. Jack decided to act. He got up, walked over to one of the attendants and asked directly, "What is going on here? That message is not normal. We need answers." The attendant, visibly uncomfortable, shook his head. "Sir, we're investigating. Please return to your seat." But Jack could spot a lie. He returned to his seat, but his eyes remained fixed on the cockpit, as if he expected the mystery to unravel there. Meanwhile, an older woman sitting next to Susan began praying softly, clutching a rosary in her hands. Others started to imitate her, as if seeking divine protection was the only option left. The lights began flickering again, this time accompanied by a high-pitched sound that echoed through the cabin. It was a buzzing noise, intermittent and unsettling, causing some passengers to cover their ears. The sense that something was terribly wrong was inescapable. And then the flight reached a new level of tension. The oxygen masks dropped abruptly, even though there were no signs of cabin depressurization. Screams filled the cabin and chaos erupted. "Put on the masks! This is an emergency!" shouted one of the attendants, but the desperation in their tone only escalated the panic. Jack looked around, trying to keep a level head, but he realized that whatever was happening couldn't be explained by the usual rules of aviation. As the passengers struggled to put on their oxygen masks, the plane made a sudden sharp turn to the left. Many were thrown against their seatbacks, and screams mixed with the sound of the engines, which seemed to be working harder than usual. Jack, gripping the armrest of his seat tightly, looked over at Susan, who was trying to shield Ethan with her own body. "This isn't just turbulence," he muttered to himself, his heart racing. The intercom buzzed, but this time it wasn't the calm voice of the captain that was heard. It was a distorted electronic tone. "Route change required. Destination recalculated." Many passengers frowned in confusion. Some screamed, demanding answers, but none of the attendants could respond. What was this destination point? There were no more answers, only uncertainties hanging in the air like the plane itself. Susan held Ethan tightly as he pointed out the window. "Mom, those lights again!" She glanced outside and saw the same blue and purple glow Jack had noticed earlier. But now, the light seemed closer, almost following the plane. Jack, also observing the phenomenon, tried to take a picture with his phone, but the device wouldn't work. Neither his nor anyone else's around him. It was as if something was blocking all signals. In the cabin, the tension among the flight attendants was growing. One of them ran toward the cockpit door, pounding on it. "Captain, we need instructions." He looked back at the passengers who were watching him as if expecting him to take control of the situation. But he was as lost as everyone else. Jack noticed the fear in his eyes and stood up again. "If no one knows what's going on, maybe we should all know what we're up against," he said, drawing the attention of those nearby. Suddenly the cabin lights went out completely, plunging the plane into darkness. Only the glow of the external lights, now pulsating intensely, illuminated the cabin. The screams momentarily stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. That was when a voice echoed through the airplane's sound system, calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, your new journey is just beginning." The message wasn't from the captain, and no one recognized the voice. Terror gripped the cabin as the phrase repeated itself, as if it were a welcome announcement for something no one wanted to face. The voice repeated the message one last time before fading away, leaving the passengers in complete despair. "Your new journey is just beginning." The words echoed in everyone's minds, creating a suffocating panic. Susan held Ethan tightly, as if she could shield him from whatever was happening. Jack, still standing, looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. "This isn't normal. This isn't human," he murmured, barely believing his own words. The external lights continued to pulse, casting the cabin in eerie shades of blue and purple, creating haunting shadows on the passengers' faces. The strange sound returned, a deep, continuous hum that seemed to vibrate through everyone's bones. Some covered their ears, while others simply wept, unable to process what they were experiencing. A woman at the back began shouting, "Someone is controlling us! This is a hijacking!" But what could it be? There was no logical explanation. Jack tried once more to reach the flight attendants, but they were now huddled near the cockpit, whispering in tense voices. "You need to tell us what's happening," he demanded, his voice firm. One of the attendants, visibly shaken, replied, We don't know. Communication with the tower has been cut off. Even the captain doesn't know what this is." It was the first time they admitted they were as lost as the passengers. The admission sent a chill down Jack's spine. Suddenly the plane's interior lights came back on, but at an unnatural intensity, bathing the cabin in a cold, artificial glow. It felt as though someone or something wanted everyone to see each other clearly. The entertainment screens powered on again, but this time they displayed something different. It was no longer the message, "You have been chosen." Now, the screen showed images of unfamiliar places, mist-covered mountains, dense forests, and what appeared to be a massive glowing structure in the distance. These weren't places on Earth that anyone there could recognize. Then the hum was replaced by a new sound, a series of high-pitched, intermittent tones, as if it were a code. Jack noticed a man with a laptop trying to decipher it, but the device wouldn't turn on. The situation grew increasingly surreal, as though the plane was being guided to a destination no one understood. Jack looked at Susan and Ethan, trembling silently, and felt an overwhelming urge to protect them. But protect them from what? He didn't know. And that was the worst part. The unknown was in control. The passengers watched the images on the screens in absolute silence. The scenes looked as though they had been pulled from a dream or a nightmare. Floating mountains, skies glowing with impossible colors, empty cities with architecture no one could recognize. Susan, trembling, held Ethan's hand tightly as he asked, "Mom, where is that? Are we going there?" She wanted to reassure him, but she had no answer. All she felt was fear. Suddenly the voice returned over the sound system, cold and mechanical. "The journey must continue. You have been chosen." The phrase repeated over and over like a mantra echoing through the cabin. Jack stood up again, this time with more determination. "We can't just sit here and wait for whatever's happening. We need to figure out how to regain control of this plane." His firm voice inspired some passengers to agree, while others remained frozen, unable to react. The flight attendants, now completely out of answers, opened the cockpit door, something rarely done during a flight. When the door swung open, those who could see inside were met with a startling sight. The captain and co-pilot looked just as bewildered as the passengers. A control panel glowed with signals no one there could recognize. "We're being redirected to a location outside our planned route," the captain said, sweat dripping down his face. "I don't know how or why, but something external is controlling the navigation system." The revelation sent a new wave of panic through the cabin. A woman began screaming, calling out to God, while another man desperately tried to open the emergency exit, ignoring the fact that they were miles above the ground. Jack tried to maintain composure and rally the passengers. "Listen, everyone. We need to stick together and think clearly. Panicking will only make things worse." His voice was authoritative, but even he didn't know what to do next. Then something happened that no one expected. The airplane windows turned completely white, as if an intense light had engulfed the entire exterior. For a moment, it felt as though the plane was floating in an absolute void. No horizon, no sky, no ground. "We're entering something," Jack said quietly as he stared out the window beside him. And before anyone could respond, the voice returned once more. "Welcome. The transition is almost complete." But where were they going? And what did transition mean? The intense light covering the windows began to fade slowly, revealing a completely different landscape. The sky, once dark and dotted with stars, now appeared as a blend of vibrant colors, shades of orange, purple, and gold, swirling like waves. Below, a vast expanse of floating mountains and rivers glowing as if made of liquid light stretched out. The passengers, incredulous, stared out the windows, unable to believe what they were seeing. "This can't be real," Jack muttered, while Susan clutched Ethan even tighter. In the cockpit, the captain desperately tried to regain control. "All systems have been disabled. We have no autonomy over the plane. We're being guided by something." The word "something" lingered in the air, amplifying the fear. He pressed buttons and turned dials, none of which responded. With each failed attempt, the despair on his face grew more evident. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted to the co-pilot, who simply shook his head, equally bewildered. Suddenly, the seat screens came back to life. This time, they displayed a different message. "The judgment begins now." The passengers read the words in unison as an eerie silence filled the cabin. Susan looked at Jack, who was visibly trying to stay calm. "Judgment? What kind of judgment?" asked an elderly woman seated nearby. No one had answers, but the message carried an almost supernatural weight. As everyone tried to process what was happening, the plane began to slow down. It felt as if it were being gently landed by invisible hands. The hum of the engines faded to near silence, and the ground beneath the plane seemed stable. "We're landing, but where?" murmured the co-pilot. When the plane finally stopped, the silence was broken by a single sound, the click of the emergency doors opening on their own, like an invitation to step outside. The passengers hesitated, but curiosity mingled with fear began to take over. Jack was the first to rise, followed by Susan and Ethan. "We need to figure out where we are," he said, glancing at the others. Some reluctantly followed, while others remained frozen in their seats, petrified. As they crossed through the doors, the sight left them speechless. It wasn't an airport or anything remotely resembling Earth. It was a vast, surreal space where gravity seemed altered, and a strange sense of peace, intertwined with fear, hung in the air. The judgment was about to begin. As they stepped onto the unfamiliar ground, the passengers found themselves surrounded by an environment that defied logic. The floor was translucent, like glass, reflecting the vibrant colors of the sky above. Colossal structures, impossible to describe with precision, seemed to emerge from nowhere, floating weightlessly. There was no sound except the passengers' breathing and the faint whisper of a wind no one could feel. "This feels like a dream," Susan said, holding Ethan's hand tightly. Jack, standing beside her, scanned the surroundings, trying to find some point of reference. At the center of the surreal landscape, a platform began to rise, emerging from the ground as if it were a living part of the environment. Everyone turned to watch. It was circular, emitting a soft, golden glow that pulsed rhythmically. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the center of the platform, humanoid but indescribable. Its presence radiated an authority that was felt before it could be understood. "Welcome," the figure said, its voice reverberating as though it came from within the mind of each person. "Who are you? Where are we?" Jack shouted, attempting to confront the being that seemed to hold all the answers. The figure turned toward him, but did not respond immediately. Instead, it raised one of its hands, and a series of lights began to shine around the platform. Each light projected images of the passengers, moments from their lives, their choices, actions, and the consequences that followed. It was as though an invisible story was being told, revealing secrets many would have preferred to keep hidden. "You have been chosen for this judgment because your actions have impacted more lives than you realize," the figure said, its tone both calm and unyielding. "This is not a judgment as you know it. Here, every decision you have made will be weighed, and the purpose of your existence will be revealed." The words echoed, leaving everyone stunned. Susan held Ethan even closer as he watched the lights, fascinated, not fully understanding what was unfolding. Some passengers began to protest, while others broke down in tears, but the figure remained unfazed. "You believed your lives were guided by chance, but now you will see that every choice carries eternal weight." The images began to change, showing moments when the passengers faced moral dilemmas, choices between right and wrong. For Jack, it was a moment when he betrayed a colleague to advance his career. For Susan, it was a difficult decision that saved her life but cost someone else theirs. The truth was unavoidable, and the judgment had begun. The projection of the images continued, illuminating each passenger's face with scenes from their lives. Every decision, every mistake, and every sacrifice was laid bare for all to see. Jack, who had always considered himself a rational man, felt his chest tighten as he watched a moment from his youth. A time when he had falsely accused a friend to secure a promotion. He closed his eyes, but the figure's voice echoed in his mind. "You cannot escape the truth, Jack. Not here." Susan, tears streaming down her face, stared intently at a scene from her past. It was the day she chose to leave an abusive relationship, but in doing so, left someone behind who later lost their way. "I didn't have a choice," she murmured, clutching Ethan tightly. The figure addressed her. "Everyone has choices, Susan. Some more difficult than others, but their impact reaches far beyond what you can see." Its voice, calm yet heavy, seemed to press down on each person. Some passengers began to kneel, begging for forgiveness. An elderly woman sobbed as she clutched a rosary, praying softly. One man suddenly stood and shouted, "This is a sham! I don't believe any of this! Who do you think you are to judge us?" The figure, unmoving, responded with quiet serenity, "I do not judge. You judge yourselves. I am merely the reflection of truth." The words hung in the air, silencing the man and causing others to shrink further into themselves. Ethan, still too young to fully grasp what was happening, looked up at his mother and asked innocently, "Are they mad at you, Mom?" Susan, unable to hold back her tears, embraced her son tightly and shook her head. "No, my love. They just want me to remember." Hearing this, Jack felt an unfamiliar sense of responsibility well up inside him. "It's not just about what we've done," he said aloud, "but about what we're capable of doing from this point on." The figure seemed to acknowledge Jack's words, tilting its head slightly. "Very good," it said. "The judgment is not only about mistakes, but about learning. You are here to confront the truth, but also to choose what you will do with it. Now, look within yourselves and decide, who do you want to become? The atmosphere grew even quieter as each passenger turned inward, facing and wrestling with their own truths at the deepest level. The silence was so profound, it felt like a part of that place. Each passenger was lost in their own memories, grappling with an internal confrontation they could not escape. The lights around the platform began to shine more brightly as the central figure moved slightly, as though waiting for something significant. Jack was the first to break the silence, rising slowly. "I understand," he said, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "It doesn't matter what we did in the past. What matters is what we choose to do from now on." The figure tilted its head again, as if acknowledging Jack's statement. "Exactly," it replied, its voice calm but full of power. "The past cannot be changed, but the future remains a blank canvas. You were brought here to understand that every choice, no matter how small it seems, holds the power to transform lives, including your own." Jack felt a tremendous weight lift from his shoulders, but he knew there was still a decision to be made. Susan, still holding Ethan, stood beside Jack. "I won't let my mistakes define me," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "I choose to be better, not just for myself, but for him," she added, looking at her son. Other passengers began following her example, standing one by one and declaring their intentions. Some cried, others remained silent, but the atmosphere, once heavy with despair, was now filled with a sense of hope. The figure looked at them all and raised a hand, dimming the lights and calming the environment. "You have passed the judgment," it said in a lighter tone. "The lesson was not about punishment, but understanding. You are responsible for your choices, but you also have the power to rewrite your stories. This is not the end, but the beginning of something new." The words echoed, bringing a peace no one expected to feel in that moment. Suddenly the landscape began to fade, dissolving into a bright light. The passengers felt the ground disappear beneath their feet, but there was no fear, only the sensation that they were returning to where they belonged. When they opened their eyes again, they were back on the plane. The cabin lights were normal, the engines hummed peacefully, and the pilot announced their arrival at the destination. It was as if nothing had happened, but for the 237 passengers, everything had changed. Flight 485 would never be forgotten, not for its mystery, but for the lives it transformed that Christmas night.